Welcome to Dynamic Page, a storytelling multi-sensory experience for the grown-ups. We are joined this evening by Brandi Iberia on music, Paulina Garcia as our artists. Our stories are written by writers Tyler Odneal and Becky Franzel, and I will be your voice actor, Dasha Kelly Hamilton. Let's get into it. Terrarium by Becky Franzel. A siren wailed through the empty streets. Like the forlorn call of a loon, it echoed and lingered in the silence it replaced. Streetlights lining the city street went off, one by one, until the worn white picket fences were engulfed in darkness, the moon hidden behind clouds. A great horned owl scanned the block with astute eyes from its perch on the street's border, waiting. Not even a tree dared to rustle lest it be chopped down and taken away. Behind a set of slatted blinds, Jeremiah too waited. But for what, he wasn't certain. He never looked outside after the night siren wailed. Until now. Until now, he had been too scared. He had been told to be scared. From his father, from his school, from the small radio he kept on the windowsill next to his bed, no matter what station he turned to. And now, he still was scared. Knees hugged to his chest tight, his nose hitting the top of his right knee. Hiding, but peering over his knobby knees with curious eyes. What he knew terrified him, but it wasn't that he didn't know why it kept him waiting, watching. He felt a book he had hidden inside his pillow's cover earlier that day, tracing its outline with his fingers. And he knew he had to be careful. If anyone saw him looking out, he knew that something bad would happen. Not what would happen exactly, but something. Even if he didn't know what that something was enough. Nobody seemed to know what would happen if you were caught looking, only that it was strictly prohibited. But for as long as Jeremiah could remember, the night siren marked when outside was no longer safe, and the siren that wailed in the morning marked when it was safe again. He had never seen what he was supposed to be afraid of, but this idea of fear scared him more than any concrete demon ever had. It had no face, not even an outline. Textbooks told him of what it had been like before. City streets filled with crime, with corruption, with blind hatred. In school, he read of what the world had been like before, though it was rarely discussed outside of the text. But Jeremiah did not know that world. All he knew was this world, controlled, contained, and safe. All he knew was that he should be scared, though he didn't know why. Those who lived through it didn't speak on it. Now they simply shut their blinds and locked their doors. Before, Jeremiah accepted this. He didn't even know that what he was afraid of. All he knew that he was afraid. And this was enough to keep him tucked in past curfew, looking away. Until now. He heard his father's footsteps in the hall. The flick of lights turned off, and the sound of shades drawn and locks clicked into place. Secured. Though his father had lived before the designated curfew, he never elaborated on the demons he faced before then. Jeremiah never felt it right to ask. Even when he was younger, there were some subjects that instinctively he knew should never be brought up. A scar on his father's cheek running deep was the only information he needed. All he knew was that inside this house, they were safe. Inside, they were secure. Jeremiah turned to look over his shoulder as he heard his father's footsteps approaching towards the bedroom door he just kept open a crack. He imagined his father walking down the hall towards his room, wearing the same robe he wore every night, worn, frayed, gray, head hanging down low with his glasses slipping off his nose. The footsteps stopped. For a second, Jeremiah thought his father would come into his room to say something, anything maybe. Jeremiah craned his neck to look through the crack in his door, but his body shifted and the cot beneath him creaked. The footsteps continued, and behind them his father's shadow. Jeremiah looked down to the floor. then up to the walls, scanning the room as he heard his father's door shut behind him. This room Jeremiah sat in was his, but not his. His was the room he was told it was his. His in that it looked just like the other room, and just like the one before that. Wooden floors, uneven, white walls, cracked. One bookshelf in the corner containing the same 5 books he's read so many times he could probably recite them by heart if he had to. The binding on each was worn from other children who, too, had read them so many times they could probably recite them by heart if they had to. Ones he had carried from house to house, stories he had accumulated along the way. Empty stories, but happy stories where everyone lived happily in a world he now knew. A distraction. And at the time when he first read them, they did their job. When he first read them, they made him happy, at peace, but now, to him, they were empty. Jeremiah faced the window again, wide-eyed, looking out through his new bedroom window that looked just like every window in every room he had left behind. But he would have never done this in his past rooms. In his past rooms, he would have tucked himself in, back facing the window. Blinds shut, his senses invaded by the previous dweller's scent that never fully washed off, until slowly with time it became his own. He took out the book from his pillowcase. It was worn, no book jacket, thin, 50 pages, no title page, and it was a story set in a time that was not his own, or at least a place that was not his own. He didn't know. He had never left the city's border. In the book, the setting was unfamiliar, but it felt comfortable to him, set under a sky that he had never known. A clear sky, unclouded, in a town that was not his own, a town where people chose where they could live, but built lives of their own, an independent agency that was unfamiliar to him. Free. Emily, the protagonist, was still clear in his mind. Though he couldn't remember any explicit description of her, he felt he knew her. He saw her. In the short hour he read the text, he grew closer to Emily than he'd known to anyone else in his short life. She was free, and in that freedom, he knew her. Though he had never been told explicitly, he knew that this book was to be kept a secret. Left behind on the bus he took with his father, left behind on a seat as if it had been left specifically for him. And Jeremiah could have sworn his father saw him shove the book into the inside pocket of his jean jacket, but it was difficult to tell if his father truly noticed anything anymore. His father's distant eyes averted shortly after, looking out the window at the houses they passed, arms folded over his chest. Now, through his bedroom window, Jeremiah probed the heavens looking for the constellations he had just read about, those illustrated within the book. Orion's belt, the Little Dipper, anything. He looked through the book again for reference, a short passage, and then looked out the window again. In the book, Emily saw them in a sky so easily. She just had to tilt her head up, and there they were. Here, his windows were covered in thick film, the sky filled with clouds. He tried to ignore the familiar sense of insecurity creeping up his spine as he looked away, looking back at the book. The fireflies flickered in the cornfield where Emily lay looking up at the sky filled with stars. It was so easy for her, to the point where he just began to think that maybe she was speaking of another sky. He looked at his suitcases in the corner. Since Jeremy's 4th birthday, these bags held everything. From teddy bears to textbooks to dress shoes, his bags had protected his life through the intrusive eye of the outside world. Like everything else he had owned, he felt certain that these bags would always be there for them. This small consistency gave him comfort. After living in a state of constant change, constant moving, Jeremy had become obsessed with any form of stability. This consistency had been enough to keep him warm until Emily. Now, these suitcases anchor. Inside these suitcases, which contained everything he owned, his world was small. Emily never mentioned suitcases. Her world was the world, uncontained, expansive. Outside his room, a storm picked up. First, the wind. The window rattled as a gust of wind screeched through the gaps between the glass and the window pane. He did not belong here. He had always known that, he thought, though it had always been in the back of his mind. Now, after reading of a different world, it was at the forefront of his mind. But fear, it was the fear that kept him here, in his room, wrapped in his covers, eyes peering from behind his knees. The faceless demons he was told about, they kept him here. Rain pounded on his window, which leaked through the cracks between the frame and the glass. He looked harder for the stars. Had he ever seen stars, he wondered? He couldn't now say for certain. And what were fireflies? He imagined bursts of flame floating in the air, contained, peaceful, with energy. This was not his world. He would see none of these things outside of his window. No fireflies, no cornfield, no stars, no Emily. Outside of his window, there was only darkness. He burrowed his head underneath a well-worn floral blanket and closed his eyes, beckoning sleep. The previous owner's distinct scent now surrounded him, invaded his senses as he wrapped his head deep in the covers, clutching the book to his chest. He closed his eyes and imagined what stars might look like. He imagined fireflies. He imagined a cornfield. He imagined what Emily might look like, what they would talk about, where they might explore. As he fell asleep, he imagined what it would be like to run free, to explore only to return to a place that held comfort, security, warmth, a home. This place was not his home. This place has just come to be a place he was. The place he had come from had not been his home. Never had he been able to call any of these empty shells home. The very word had gone extinct when he was only 4 years old. For the past 6 years, he had only lived in houses, but never a home. That was Terrarium by Becky Franzel. Going to bring Becky into the screen.
Hey, yeah, that was beautiful. I loved all of it. It was fun to watch it come alive. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's start right there. So what was that seeing as a writer, you have the image and you have a sense of how the story will flow. So all of those were taken from you, air quotes, and we were able to make some art with your words. What was it like, that out-of-body, out-of-word experience?
Oh, it was it's always cool to see how everything is interpreted, especially the bass line. The bass line is awesome to that. I really love it.
Great. Yeah, I was like, I have no idea what to play.
Yeah, no, it was great. And it just went along with the way that it was read so well, and the scene that's painted too. I just love it.
Excellent.
It's always interesting to hear what rhythm comes out of other people reading it, because whenever you write something, the rhythm is different in your head. And it's amazing what other people's rhythm can bring into it. I love it.
Do you have a chance to have your work shared or read by other people often?
Not often. No. Usually when I write something, I try to read it out loud myself a few times just to see how the rhythm is. My upbringing is music, so I try to keep the rhythm in there. So I like hearing what other people's rhythms are, definitely.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your writing life. What are you working on right now?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on a novel fiction piece called Death's Intern Derek. Basically, just Death gets an intern, and it's basically him learning the ropes and kind of screwing up, He's not exactly the best worker.
Wow. I guess Death deserves an ineffective intern.
Oh yeah, it's been kind of my thought child for a while, and I decided, well, why not finally make it a thing now that we're all stuck indoors? So yeah.
Yeah, that phantom writing schedule is actually going to be a thing now, right?
Oh, now we have to stick to it because we have no other excuse, which has been fun.
Well, fantastic. Well, I am looking forward to hearing about the mic drop of this manuscript at the end of all of this. Thank you for sharing these words with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. We're going to peer at the art that you have going on so far.
Awesome.
We're all just gazing at you. So while you put those last few touches on, looking at the time. Yes, so we have our second story, which is by Tyler Odneal. And it is, he shared with me that it's part of a series. Didn't know that initially, so I'm excited to have a visual aspect, add a visual aspect to it. But I'm also picking it up in the middle. So Paulina, I'll follow your cue. Brandi, can you thump a few things?
Oh, yes.
While she's being
Sorry,
creative?
I switched.
I know.
Absolutely. Let's see.
Okay.
I'm gonna try my ghostly sound.
Ooh. The Tree by Tyler Odneal. Wait a minute. Oh, here we go. Moses hadn't said a word in a while. He continued to stare at the paper. He could only read a few words, but she knew he was trying. In his mind, he thought himself just as educated as the son of the dean who'd gone off to Harvard. Laura gazed upon her husband. She searched his face, and she decided, after a period of tranquility, that she'd clear the table. Laura began her hesitant ascent from the rickety table. Shakily, she gained her composure and began to collect her utensils. Her small feet struggled to take steps, but eventually she was standing before the wash bucket. She took deep breaths as dishes plunged into the water, which splashed her blouse. Her eyes set on her stomach again. She gazed out of the makeshift window as she rubbed her belly. Some of the other women knew. They'd pass her, lay hands on her, bless her. Moses was aware of it too, or so she thought. Her trance was broken by the force of large hands on her neck. They tightened. And for a moment she was paralyzed. Her husband released her and retreated to the bedroom. Laura picked herself up from the dusty floor. Her hands shook ferociously. She couldn't keep still. Then she turned to face her husband. He studied her and then began to step near her. Laura had been crying but would not waver. He watched as tears poured down her face. He inched closer toward her like a lioness before its prey. She gazed at him, and before he reached her, she was kicking and screaming. "I'm sorry," he whispered as she revealed the rope he'd been concealing. Her hands found her hands found a place on her stomach as if to send a message. Moses did not pay any attention to that. Thud. He placed the skillet on the table. Now the woman was asleep. When Laura came to, she was being dragged onto the field. Her clothes were grass-stained and her feet were dirty. The sky was sprawled out above her, an endless lake in which she wished to jump. She closed her eyes, feigning unconsciousness. After a few more tugs, Moses dropped her underneath the willow tree. Laura could feel his hands around her neck. Slowly, he began to wrap the noose around it. Her voice rang out into the fields. It echoed into the shacks like theirs, to other people like them. She watched as a bird flew above her. Laura had never heard herself scream so loud. She wondered if God could hear her. Laura continued to scream, her eyes bellowing like winds through the fields. Her husband spoke quietly. He had finally secured the rope around her neck. He paused only to catch his breath, wipe his face. Then his eyes were wide and dark again. Moses gazed up to the large tree. Its branches were bare, brittle. He threw the tail end of the rope over a branch. It swiveled down to him almost perfectly, in the same way the serpent had swiveled down to Eve. A voice called out to him as he began to pull. He continued his job. Laura's feet floated above the ground. They swayed and kicked and eventually went limp. Fireworks rang out. The people had never heard such a sound, and like fruit falling from the tree, she fell to the ground in the same breath, watched as Moses' frame collapsed in front of her. Blood splattered on her face, speckled her hair. It was darker than she thought it would be. The blood. Slowly, the landowner eased over to her past her husband's still frame. He began to speak to her, placing the revolver on the ground. Laura could not hear him. There were others gathering, concern in their eyes. They all began speaking to her. An elder woman began to rock Laura in her arms, shouting prayers, begging mercy. Laura could not speak. Wind began to blow. Small pinkish colored petals fluttered and danced in the breeze, and Laura eyed the petals with envy. After what seemed like an eternity, a man she had never seen before came out from a shack nearby. He beheld a bedsheet. It arose like a cloud in the wind beneath him. He approached the crowd, his face a blur, covered her husband's body. Sometimes, usually at around sunset, she'd remember. She'd be cleaning her shack, sweeping dust out of the entrance, and it hit her. She'd be preparing a meal and she'd see him. Laura's hands would run through her own hair, down the sides of her face, and she'd touch her cheek, fight back the tears. At night, sometimes, she'd open her eyes and be standing toe-to-toe with the tree. The tree. Its ridges, branches tangled, intertwined. Laura had wanted to tell the others how it spoke. The tree, how it had spoken to her, invited her out of the shack to its roots. She'd reached a hand out to go touch it. "Don't go," it'd say. Inside, Laura would find Stephen, still asleep in the spot where his father once laid. She'd get in bed and close her eyes, unsure if she'd been dreaming. Mornings were different. She'd spend her days with her baby on her torso, wrapped around her as she worked in the fields. In the past, she would have pricked her fingers. She'd pause, hold back tears. Now, she pricked them all the time on the thorny vine of the plant. There'd be no tears. Laura would wipe her finger and continue. The other woman would help her. They'd help count how many stacks she'd fill with the white crop. They'd offer to look after the baby, but she'd always refuse. One day, a young girl attempted to hold Stephen in her arms. He trotted toward her, his tiny fingers grabbing at her dress. She attempted to pick him up, the way she would a doll. Laura appeared in an instant, knife in tow. The girl ran away, nearly dropping the baby. She told the elder women what had happened, and when they stormed into the field, Laura had denied it all, choking it up to the girl's sense of wonder. Sometimes, at night, she'd find herself in the fields after she'd put Stephen to bed. She'd run toward the tree, rub her hands along its rigid bark, sit at the crevices formed by its roots. There you are, it'd say in a soothing tone. You've worked so hard today. You deserve some time. Laura would smile brightly. She'd skip around the tree, which seemed to have grown, with more and more rings added by the day. Laura would sing songs and recite rhymes she learned as a child. It had become her friend, the tree, gleefully accepting her, wrapping its twisted branches around her. One night, she'd been out so long she almost didn't notice her baby, crying. She ran toward the shack, stammering near the doorway. An elder woman was there already, tending to the child. Laura crept near where the elder woman was and slowly grabbed her baby from the woman's arms. Where'd you go? She inquired, judgment in her tone. The woman was silent for a moment. The baby was here crying for a good while. I thought I heard something, Laura began. Someone trying to steal crops? There was silence, the white of the elder woman's eyes. You have to tend to your child, she warned. Folks are worried about you. The others have noticed the strange things the woman had taken up since her husband had died. Laura moved toward her bedroom, sitting on the edge of the mattress. I'll get some rest now, she told the elder woman. You sure you're okay? She responded, still sitting. Yeah, you can go now, advised Laura, baby in arm. The elder woman began to stand. She paused for a spell. I think that tree was bad luck, said the elder woman, glancing out at the fields, a grimace overtaking her face. I sure am glad they chopped it down a couple of years ago. Yeah, whispered Laura, her arms tightening around her son Stephen. Then she drifted off, dreaming of a different land, with a spider spinning its web just above her head. That was an excerpt of The Tree by Tyler Odneal. I know I'm saying that wrong. I'm going to bring him right now so he can correct me.
Odneal.
I love that.
Like, you guys did a great job.
Awesome.
Odneal.
Yeah.
So same thing. So you gave us great raw content, this story, these words, and
Thank you.
What was it like watching it being played out this way?
It was an amazing experience. It was so interesting to watch the painting and just to get people's interpretations of what they feel, and the music and everything is really, really great and like powerful and just adds to the aesthetic of the whole thing. And I guess kind of like Becky was saying, you kind of have like a rhythm in your head of how you think it should go, and then to hear other people's interpretations, it just kind of almost like gives you more ideas. And this is really encouraging. It's really nice. Yeah.
We like the creepy music.
I got
great.
I got to use it. It's cool.
Fresh from the continent. So what about you? How are you, and what is your relationship with your writing these days?
I'm trying to write more. That story is a part of a collection of short stories that I'm working on. Just about the experiences of Black people, past and present, and the stories, I guess, were kind of like linked together and tell a story of one family or one group of people. And so I've been working on stories that are all linked. A lot of them are I know a lot of my stories are set like in like back in the day, late 1800s, early 1900s, but a lot of them are modern. And I was just figuring for the book, hopefully I can kind of stagger them so there'll be something, a story from maybe like late 1800s, then a story from the present time to show how a lot of things have changed, but a lot is still the same for people of color. And
Oh,
so that's what we're.
that's fantastic. We have a
Yeah.
comment of someone's watching. They're impressed with the story. And is there a place that they can see this series as it develops?
Well, I had like a few of the stories have been published. So I had one of them published at The Furrow, which is a literary magazine out of UWM. That's a story called Theft. Also, I had another story I wrote called Walls, published with Downward Urban Arts, and it's a literary magazine out of New York, but it has roots in Milwaukee. The lady who created it, Nikisha Washington, is from Milwaukee. She went to UWM. Yeah. So.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, I'm going to bring Becky back online as well. Look
Go,
at
Hey,
us.
go, Dasha.
I know, right? Oh, I'm about to be dangerous now.
That's so cool.
So, if we can have a chance to look at the final piece that you made, Paulina.
That was great.
That's awesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it is.
So we are at the end, and usually with the live event, there's a bar open, there's mingling, there's chatting, and we got to focus on all of the art part of it. So I wanted to thank all of you for sharing your time and your talent. I want to thank the folks who are watching. This feels pretty good and was in terms of pulling it together. So for however long we are sharing these inside spaces. This is something that happens on outside spaces too. So this started as a live series, and I kind of like the digital because you get to really focus on what's happening. So keep scribbling. Oh, wait. Thank you, Tim. You helped me show off right now. So Michael Tim says, really cool experience. Thanks to everyone. So really excited that we made this happen. We'll definitely do it again, and we won't have to wait for months and months and months and months and months. So have an amazing time, an amazing night, and all of my creators that joined us tonight, stay creating.
Thank you.
Thanks
you.
for having us.